Hundreds protest at White House demanding protection for undocumented immigrants amid deportation push. If you are interested in this, please pay attention and watch the video through to the end to get all the information. Please hit like and subscribe, and don't forget to push the notification bell for an upcoming video. So, without any further delay, let's jump into the video. Today, we're talking about a powerful moment in American history. On August 16, 2025, hundreds of people marched right up to the White House gates in Washington, D.C. to demand justice for undocumented immigrants. They weren't just voicing frustration. They were calling for permanent protections for an estimated 11 million people living in the shadows across the U.S. But what's really going on here? Is this the start of a bigger movement or a flashpoint in the ongoing immigration debate? Let's break it down step by step with real sources and context, so you can form your own view. 1. What happened? It's a warm August afternoon in D.C. Families, activists, and community leaders from across the country converge near Lafayette Square, just steps from the White House. Organized by groups like the Free D.C. movement, the crowd estimated at several hundred marched peacefully, chanting slogans like "Get off our streets," and holding banners urging an end to what they call racial profiling and indiscriminate detentions. The spark? President Trump's recent executive actions ramping up federal involvement in D.C.'s policing, including a surge in immigration-related arrests that jumped 40% in the area. Protesters blocked key intersections briefly to draw attention, but the event stayed nonviolent, with no major clashes reported. Their core demand? Halt mass deportations and create a pathway to stay for the roughly 11 million undocumented folks who've called America home for years, many contributing as essential workers in farms, construction, and healthcare. 2. The bigger picture why now? Zoom out. And this protest is part of a wave of demonstrations hitting U.S. cities this summer. Since Trump took office in January 2025, his administration has prioritized what he calls restoring law and order through policies like expanding ICE raids, deploying the National Guard to high immigration areas, and targeting sanctuary cities that limit cooperation with federal enforcement. In D.C. specifically, the federal takeover of local policing announced in early August has led to fears of overreach. Residents and immigrants alike report feeling unsafe, with stories of low-level stops turning into detentions. Protesters argue this isn't just about immigration. It's about civil rights and who gets to feel secure in America. On the flip side, supporters of the policies point to public safety, saying stricter enforcement reduces crime linked to unchecked borders. But data shows mixed results while arrests are up. Overall crime rates in D.C. haven't spiked dramatically. Protesters and advocates argue that current immigration policies are harming families and entire communities. They emphasize the need for more compassionate reforms, such as granting amnesty to undocumented immigrants who have lived in the U.S. years. Nearly 11 million undocumented individuals reside in the country, many of whom are parents to U.S.-born children. These advocates warn that strict enforcement measures separate families and create unnecessary hardships, affecting both adults and children alike. On the other hand, the administration maintains that its immigration policies are designed to protect national security by focusing on individuals who pose threats. It enforces existing laws rigorously, citing a sharp increase in arrests related to immigration. For instance, immigration-related arrests in Washington, D.C. have risen by approximately 40% following intensified federal operations. This data is used to justify stronger enforcement, even as critics call for a more balanced approach that addresses both safety concerns and humanitarian needs. 3. The human side and what's next. Behind the signs and chants are real stories. One marcher, a D.C. teacher who's undocumented, told reporters, "We've paid taxes for 15 years. Raise my kids here, why rip us apart?" These protests echo the 11 million figure often cited in immigration debates, a number from recent Pew Research estimates of folks who've built lives here despite legal hurdles. Looking ahead, similar rallies are planned in cities like New York and Los Angeles, as lawsuits challenge the federal moves. Congress could step in with reform bills, but with elections looming, it's anyone's guess. Over 40% of arrests in Trump's D.C. law enforcement surge relate to immigration, AP analysis finds. President Donald Trump framed the federal law enforcement surge in Washington, D.C. as a focused effort to curb violent crime. However, data analyzed by the Associated Press indicates that more than 40% of the arrests made during the month-long operation were related to immigration violations. This highlights that, alongside crime reduction, the administration pursued a hardline immigration agenda in the nation's capital. Since the operation began, over 2,300 arrests were reported, including homicide suspects, gang members, drug and gun offenders, and individuals accused of other crimes. More than 220 illegal firearms were seized, including a weapon from a teen who had made concerning social media posts. Despite these figures, immigration violations represented the largest single category of arrests. Critics argue the operation served as a political tool to advance federal immigration enforcement under the guise of addressing violent crime. Austin Rose, managing attorney at Amicus Center for Immigrant Rights, noted that the surge became pretty clear early on that this was a major campaign of immigration enforcement. The Trump administration maintains that removing undocumented immigrants is critical to public safety, often portraying those arrested as among the worst of the worst. Yet, precise numbers of individuals with additional criminal charges remain unclear. Internal reports show that about 22% of immigrants arrested during a sampled 10-day period had prior criminal records, including offenses like DUI, drug possession, grand larceny, and burglary. The sample represents roughly a third of the surge's duration. The operation began after Trump declared a crime emergency under Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act on August 11th. This allowed federal agents, alongside National Guard troops, to assist local police. Although crime rates in D.C. had been declining prior to the operation, the administration emphasized federal involvement as a solution to the city's violent crime. Congress allowed the emergency order to expire, but federal forces remained deployed. Attorney General Pam Bondi also issued directives targeting the city's sanctuary policies, requiring cooperation between D.C. police and federal immigration authorities. Despite local legal objections, the surge significantly affected immigrant communities. ICE and CBP presence increased visibly, and activists helped share warnings about checkpoints, coordinated safe routes, and provided aid to those fearful of leaving home. Advocacy groups highlighted the climate of fear and disruption caused by the operation, with many immigrants altering daily routines to avoid federal enforcement. Meanwhile, the Department of Homeland Security publicly promoted the arrest as part of its mission to restore law and order, in D.C. emphasizing the removal of criminal aliens, drug dealers, and gang members from the city streets. Overall, while the operation was framed as a violent crime crackdown, the data and actions reveal that immigration enforcement was a primary focus, reflecting the Trump administration's broader hardline immigration strategy and its political messaging in cities with Democratic leadership. Hundreds marched to White House to protest Trump's D.C. crackdown. Hundreds of protesters gathered in Washington, D.C. on Saturday to oppose President Donald Trump's attempted takeover of the city's police department and his deployment of National Guard troops alongside federal agents. The demonstration began at DuPont Circle, with participants chanting slogans such as "Shame" and "Trump must go now," and denouncing Trump's recently declared crime emergency. Protesters then marched toward the White House, drawing attention from D.C. Metropolitan Police and National Park Service officers who maintained a distant presence. Attendees voiced concerns over the legality and ethics of the federal intervention. Maryland resident Mason Weber described the deployment as a serious ethical and legal breach, emphasizing the lack of checks and balances in Trump's actions. Protesters highlighted that Congress typically has authority over extended deployments, raising questions about executive overreach. The protest came 2 days after Attorney General Pam Bondi attempted to appoint DA Administrator Terry Cole as an emergency police commissioner with full operational control over D.C. police. This video was challenged by D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwab in federal court, resulting in Trump officials stepping back. Schwab called the decision a victory for home rule, though demonstrators argued that preventing the appointment of an emergency commissioner does not fully address broader concerns about Trump's influence over law enforcement in the Capitol. Local residents criticized the narrative of D.C. as a crime-ridden city. John Smith, a longtime resident, said Trump is exaggerating crime levels, while Catherine Ernst highlighted the need for civic engagement, urging more people to join protests to protect democratic norms. Refuse Fascism, one of the groups organizing the march, called for sustained public opposition, warning that Trump and MAGA policies threaten democratic values. Spokesperson Sam Goldman emphasized the need to turn the tide and indicated plans for additional demonstrations in the coming weeks. White House spokeswoman Abigail Jackson dismissed the protests, framing opposition as partisan obstruction. Meanwhile, several Republican governors agreed to send National Guard troops to D.C. to support Trump's enforcement actions. West Virginia pledged 300 of 400 troops, South Carolina 200, and Ohio 150. Vermont Governor Phil Scott declined a similar request. The protests illustrate growing public concern over executive overreach, the militarization of local law enforcement, and the balance of power in the nation's capital. That is all for today in this video. What are your thoughts on this? Please let us know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching the entire video. Hopefully, the information is useful to you. See you later in the next video. Till then, take care.